Okay, so here we are. You've got briefly, this is what IPCC means. It's a United Nations body. It was formed from a meteorological science panel and one or two other science panels, so it comes under the United Nations like a lot of things. 6 times now they've gone through a process of doing scientific research, coming together, bringing their findings into one, reconciling them, assigning how confident they are in each finding, and putting out reports. So AR6, here we are. It's been a long time since the last one. So this is a quite significant moment. And that's why I wanted to give a brief report on it. So the synthesis report wasn't actually new information. It sums up 3 big fat working group reports and 3 special reports. So I'll go through what these were. If I can, yes, I can. The working group 1 looks at the physical science basis of the climate system and climate change. And there are so many scientists working on this and so many techniques and satellites and so on that it's very unwise to challenge on any great scale the overall findings. But they address themselves to audiences such as in the USA who deny that man-made climate change is taking place, and they go into huge detail on what's happening, why and how it happens, and the consequences. The second working group is about adaptation and vulnerability. I've got a little window in the way there, sorry. It looks at the impacts, how we can adapt, vulnerabilities and so on. Pardon me for that little pop-up that shouldn't be there. The third one, mitigation, of course, means making something less. And the crucial thing is, can we make climate change less? Can we slow it down? Can we keep it under control? Can we ultimately bring it to a halt? And the climate change clearly is overall heating of the planet's atmosphere and the oceans, even more at the polar regions, and acidification of the oceans, rising sea levels, and all those other catastrophic consequences, which are not going to happen. They're already happening. Okay, the third report was, oh no, sorry, that was the third report. The 3 special reports, one is a focus on the impact of global warming of 1.5 centigrade, because above the olden days, because I think the panel have come to the conclusion that that really is the upper limit of anything reasonable. We're heading that way. We must strive, they say, to keep 1.5 alive. We already, with 1.2 above historic levels, have catastrophic extreme weather events and changes to the climate, changes to sea level all around the world. So that was a special focus report, and that was in the last year or two. This is the 4 slides from the second one, which is the special report on climate change and land. I've taken these from the launch presentation, August 2019. And here you can see what they're saying. Land is precious and finite. Land is interesting because we can use it to solve some of the problem. We can also use it to cause some of the problems. Climate change is causing huge problems, drought, deserts, and so on. But land use can help. For instance, forests can absorb carbon dioxide, and we can resolve a lot of issues to do with food production and many other things. So that was the second. And the third special report, the ocean and the cryosphere. Cryo means extreme cold. So the cryosphere means the icy part of the world. The poles, which are changing in unprecedentedly rapid ways. So that was, and you see the table of contents of the chapters of that report. All there, ipcc.org. Plenty to read if you're bored and with reading the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, now what do we see what does this summary, the synthesis, contain? They have very high quality graphics which are packed with information. So take a look at this right-hand half of this. Now those 5 bands represent possible future scenarios. On the left half, it's what's happened to the global climate overall, coming up to the year 2020. Those 5 bands on the right are what will happen if, and then they have what they call scenarios, pessimistic at the top, optimistic at the bottom, if all the governments and all the businesses in the world do immediately do their utmost to reduce and halt greenhouse gas emissions and so on. But I love the graphics underneath that, because if you were born a couple of years ago, there you are, 70 years old in 2090, your feet in the optimistic scenario will be at least as warm as they are now, but your head will be intolerably hot in many parts of the world, such as the entire Mediterranean area. There'll be so many days when it's too hot for humans to stay alive that it'll be effectively uninhabitable. Born in 1980, some of us here, 70 years old in 2050, you could already be experiencing extremes of heat. And of course, your children and grandchildren will be facing a very dire or uncertain future. Here are some of us born in 1950s, baby boomers, 70 years old in 2020, okay? It's already hotter than it's been. Last summer in the UK, hotter than it's ever been, I think. All right, I want you to take a close look at the bar charts there. And because the captions for each of those pairs of bars represent AR5, the 2014 predictions, and AR6, the subsequent and recent predictions. And you might see little diagonal lines. You'll see that the purple, the very high risk or impact color, comes much further down the bar in the current science consensus than it did. So extreme weather events, the second from the left set of bars, they didn't really think there were anything above high risk of extreme weather events, even at 5 degrees Celsius above historic averages. But they now feel that extreme weather events, and of course it's happening now, are going to come at us at 2 degrees, 3 degrees above historic temperatures. That's dramatic. Distribution of the impacts will be more widespread. Moving to the second to the right, global aggregate impacts, the new scientific consensus is that those will be much, much greater than they thought back in 2014. And the same applies to massive catastrophic events. That's the last bar. On the left, by the way, you get the difference between the high future scenario and the low future scenario, and various statistical bands like level of uncertainty. I'll just go to the last one of these, the second to last one. Look at this, what we need to do with greenhouse gases. And one of the sad things about going to COPs and reading about this every year is that for all these wonderful international conferences, greenhouse gas emissions have kept rising regardless. And this is where we are at 2020, when the material for this synthesis was crystallized. You see that we need to make steep drops in greenhouse gas emissions. The blue strip overlaps with the green strip in this top graph and in the others. The blue one is how to limit global warming to overall average of 1.5 Celsius above historic. Green one, if we limit it to 2 degrees. Up there in the pink and red zones, you see a little bar called nationally determined contributions. Those are the promises governments have made and aren't keeping. And the red section is what will happen if we go on as we are with governments and corporations. This is how they're walking the walk, not how they're talking the talk. Below is the same for carbon dioxide separately, and below that is the same for methane, which comes from the fossil fuel industry and from rice farming and livestock around the world. So those emissions also have to halt immediately. And as I've said before, and I'll say again, methane has a special role because it's a vicious greenhouse gas. It's very short-lived. So if we can make cuts in methane in the immediate future, it's technically possible to start cooling the planet's atmosphere in this decade, which would give us respite for the tricky problem of weaning the world's energy systems off of fossil fuels. We should do both to our utmost ability. And then I like this one. This is the final one I'm going to show you from the report. We're looking, as you go from left to right in this wiggly chart, the present world is the big black line. Going down to the lower part is the worst scenarios, and going up to the higher part is the better scenarios. So these strokes of lightning you see around the chart are opportunities or decision points, shocks that disrupt development. And depending how we respond to those shocks, if we respond poorly, we make our way down the chart. It's like snakes and ladders without the ladders. If we respond well and take all the opportunities, we can go up the chart and try and limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. It's a complex diagram. I'm afraid there's a lot to read on it, and I'm going to move on, but we will be able to put this presentation onto our Wiltshire Climate Alliance website. So I jumped forward and jumped back. Well, my take on this is that climate campaigning has changed. It was all about net zero and reaching it by 2030, reaching it notionally by 2050, Wiltshire Council and everyone. And if we can't quite do that, then we do our best. We're now in a situation where catastrophic impacts are already happening around the world. They're already happening in Europe and the UK. And what we do in Wiltshire and in communities like us across the world in reducing our emissions or not reducing our emissions and switching to zero carbon forms of energy or not, taken together with communities across the world and particularly the global north, we have the fate of the future of humanity and the planet in our hands. But it's got more urgent than at AR5 level. We now are reaching so close to various tipping points, which means things that happen like melting ice or methane bubbling up from the tundra that will bring runaway global warming, that we're in a decade of urgent short-term measures. And so things are worse. The measures we need to do now are focusing on the urgent and short-term ones. And my third personal take on this is that climate and climate action is beginning to overshadow all other environmental campaigning. Biodiversity is not sustainable unless we tame global warming. What's the point of having cleaner rivers if global warming will cause far more catastrophic impacts? All kinds of other things are starting to be overshadowed by the urgency of getting global warming under control. So it's become a big cuckoo in the nest. That makes us all very anxious. I decided not to show you lots of headlines saying how this report had pulled its punches, saying how the fossil fuel industry and the South American meat and feed industry had nobbled the report to reduce its impact and muddle and obfuscate its conclusions, because that just made me so worried. I didn't want to worry you guys too much. So I'll just skip to one last thing. A lot of us experience this worry, this anxiety, this reaction. So I thought I'd just say we shouldn't ignore our own feelings of fear, worry, depression, despair. And there are plenty of resources available to us to get help for our well-being, our psychological well-being, to talk to other people, to offload our anxiety and our fears, to explore what we can do or whether we feel we can do anything. And I've just given you a selection of those resources, and on the bottom right it says, do we want a Wiltshire Climate Alliance support group? I'm going to stop sharing there if I know how. Or can someone stop me sharing? I'm screen sharing, stop share there.